our panelists, they work at this issue on the ground. And little I've met with them, I think the discussion is going to be very rich. And so let's, with our limited time, let's move right ahead. Our first speaker will be Quentin Walcott of the Connect Training Institute. At Connect, Quentin is the director and community of the Training Institute and Community Empowerment Programs. He also spearheads the Male Anti-Violence Initiatives, where he creatively develops programming, training, educational programs centered on males to cultivate participation and leadership by men in the anti-violence movement. You can further read his bio that's listed in our program. So, Quentin, you have the floor.
Okay. Good afternoon. I do have to stand only because there's no remote to the PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. I'd like to thank Leslie Wright for, at the last minute, allowing me to be part of the panel, and to my fellow presenters. Connect is a New York City-based organization. We do work in the 5 boroughs of New York City. We are a prevention agency, and we prevent domestic violence and gender violence. That's the work that we do, kind of in a nutshell. And it's one of the only few prevention agencies in New York City and actually in the state. Our work, our mission is ultimately to prevent interpersonal violence and promote gender justice by partnering with New York City-based organizations. And we have approximately 150 community-based partnerships that are either through faith-based organizations, school-based organizations, and also our goal is really to reach, thanks. Our goal is really to reach the masses of people that are struggling with domestic violence and gender violence. Because as many of you may not know, that in New York City, about 95% of the cases right now that are reported, and all cases are not reported, are when men are committing some form of violence against women, in particular domestic violence. So that's a major statistic, and how we approach this work around domestic violence is really looking at it and trying to change the lens and transform the attitudes that perpetrators and batterers have around women and children. So basically, what we do with that large statistic is that of those 90% of the cases that are reported, maybe 20% of all DV is reported altogether, and then 20% of that 20% end up in some type of services for either batterers programs or even groups for survivors of domestic violence. So the work that we're doing at Connect is really based on a strategy really to do 2 things really. Is one, to keep women and children safe because of that statistic where people kind of look at survivors of domestic violence in 3 ways, or victims/survivors of domestic violence in 3 ways. The victim that gets abused and leaves the situation, has support systems in place, is able to leave that violent situation. The second type is probably the most predominant type, is when 7 or 8 times before a survivor leaves a domestic violence situation. And then the third type is the survivor who stays in that relationship. But in all 3 scenarios, no one wants to be abused. So our approach is really to, and this is really kind of unique in terms of domestic violence in New York City, is really to look at domestic violence not as a women's issue solely. We view it as an issue that women have to react to. And ultimately, if 90% of the cases that are reported are when men are abusing women, we view it as a men's issue. So that's one unique thing about the work that we do at Connect, is that we include in our work and our scope the idea of including men and engaging men, from the bystander to the perpetrator, to moving them from a position of being allies and activists in this work. And with that, going back to that 20% statistic, is that if only 20% of the cases are reported, and 20% of those end up in actually some type of batterers program or program to look at their violence, we're missing a multitude of people. So what we kind of designed our programming around is reaching the 80%. And 80% of the people are out there in the community somewhere. So we feel that, men can play a pivotal role in this, but not just any man and just kind of sending him into a situation. We have what we kind of built at Connect is, we have a training institute. That's one of our major programs where we train up to 300 people a year in New York City. And some of these people are social workers, some of them are psychologists, some of them are case planners, some of them are faith leaders. And so what we kind of really do is build people's capacity to approach this issue, because in reality, the community is seeing more families struggling with domestic violence than we could ever do on a daily basis as a domestic violence organization. So with our strategy, that's what we try to do. So we have, at Connect, I'm just concentrating on the work we do with men today only because of the sake of time, but we have over 4 programs and several projects that work with families in New York City struggling with these issues. And I just want to kind of highlight the goal, right? I told you about the strategy. The strategy is to work with men to keep women and children safe. And the second part of the strategy is to work with men to give them the help that they need to change the attitudes and belief systems that allow domestic violence to happen, that says it's okay for them to be abusive and get away with that. PowerPoint got a little messed up, but, basically our goal is to, if the men aren't coming to us, we want to go to them. Basically, we work a lot with faith-based organizations and their ways of approaching domestic violence. And I will not lie, it's a very, very hard group to penetrate for obvious reasons. But the idea is to really be creative in how we approach this. And for instance, there's a lot of faith-based institutions that have domestic violence ministries or women's ministries that kind of take this issue on. And that is an entry point. And we don't just want to kind of leave the issues around domestic violence with the women's ministries or the health ministries as these churches. It's important to engage men who are the pastors, the deacons, the imams, the rabbis of these faith-based organizations who are, according to our research, the people that people in the community want to go to deal with this issue. When we first started our program in Brooklyn, and now we've grown to the 5 boroughs, the research that we did focus groups, we did street surveys, community assessments, and the people in the community basically said, this is a problem. There's many reasons why it goes unreported, but if they want to deal with it, they'd rather go to their faith-based institution. So what we did was we kind of built a lot of our programming around working with faith-based institutions to engage the community on developing strategies to dealing with domestic violence, because these communities are very diverse in New York City, as you all know, and they know their communities better than we can, so we don't come in and dictate how this should be done. We work with them to develop strategies. We provide technical assistance and capacity building around that. And particularly around our work with men. I've been doing this work for about 14 years, from running batters groups to developing programs and curriculums and designing programs for high schools, colleges, and just really looking at prevention. How can we really be creative around engaging men to do this? So we have an expertise around this, and that's what we kind of lend to the communities and help them develop their own programs. So we go to the faith-based institutions, we're in the schools, we train folks who are in domestic violence organizations and people who are not deal primarily with domestic violence, but dealing with that in their either caseload or in the clients or the people that they serve in the community. So we're in workplaces, we're in barbershops, we're in wherever men are, men and boys are, we try to get there. So just to kind of lay out some of the initiatives, and these are just a few of them. We have 4 major programs now that are really preventive based, and also in some cases develop appropriate intervention when working with men. And the first one is the Men and Women as Allies Project, where we go into, I'll just kind of lay them out. Men and Women as Allies, Hombres Delegando is a really special group where we engage men who speak Spanish. And I blanket it that way because some of them are here from the United States, some are from South America, some are documented, some are undocumented, but this is our approach in dealing with them. We developed this group called Hombres Delegando, where we not only deal with some of the issues around their violence as men, and in relationships, and as fathers, we deal with the issues that they face here, being oppressed and marginalized here in the United States. And we use that as a platform to have a conversation about oppression, power and control, and in their relationships where they do have power. And we have a Manhood Development Program, which is currently running at Walton Educational Campus in the Bronx, where we work with the 5 mini schools on campus, all the young men from those schools, and we develop projects with them. And we have a monthly men's roundtable, which is also another way of engaging men, but broadening the net, because typically I could count probably on, hopefully maybe 2 hands now, the amount of men that are doing gender violence prevention work. Don is one of them here in New York City or in New York State, and there's not enough. So with this monthly men's roundtable is an opportunity to work with men who are working with men and boys in some type of capacity. And then the bulk of what we do at Connect 2 is the trainer. So we have these 2 courses that looks at understanding why men batter and abuse. And this is not really to understand and to forgive and to not hold men accountable, but this is really about understanding what is the perspective of abusive men, what is the perspective of bystanders who can potentially be abusers as well. And also we train people to run batterers intervention groups as well. So the Men and Women as Allies Union Initiative is really a creative approach where Don McPherson played a significant role in the development of the project, where we worked with Cornell University and CWA 1106 and now 1108, and at Verizon, where we've trained all of the Queens employees to look at domestic violence and its impact in the workplace. But how we did that, just to be really creative, is to really look at bullying behavior, which is a big piece for workplaces, particularly with unions that have apprenticeships and the part of the craft. So bullying is a big part of that, and also looking at workplace violence. And at the core of those 3 things, which kind of links them together, is about power and control.